Have you ever had any other church come knocking, make a play for you?
I have
yeah.
You? Who? But it's just not. Remembering legalism is a belief about what I do.
It's a belief that what? We thought we'd start by just acknowledging the elephant in the room. This past weekend, big announcement. I just wondered how you're feeling about that. Yeah, welcome to the podcast. Another episode of Don't Just Sit There. Today we have Senior Pastor Emeritus Bryan Clark with us.
Fancy title.
We're going to talk about the announcement that you made this past weekend about putting a date on the calendar when you'll retire, and then also spend some time just talking about our view of God and some of what you wrote in your book, God's Not Like That. Then I should segue too, and that'll be awkward because I just said that. But we're with, again, reminding you, we're with accomplished author of God's Not Like That.
Yep.
And Senior Pastor Emeritus, Senior Pastor of Lincoln Berean Church for over, right around 30 years. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
We need to have you back on. Maybe as we get closer to the end of the year, it'd be fun to do a little bit of a
highlight reel.
Five vivid memories.
It'd be a short show.
That's right. 5 vivid memories of your time at Lincoln Berean Church too, or
little trip down memory lane.
Trip down memory lane. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We thought we'd start by just acknowledging the elephant in the room. This past weekend, big announcement. I just wondered how you're feeling about that, how that went, how it was leading up to it. Just curious about it.
Yeah, I think it went fine. I've only done that one other time in my life.
Yeah.
So it's not like
that's right.
It's something you're good at. But for me, it feels like a relief.
Huh.
Just getting into awkward conversations where I don't want to be deceitful. I don't want to lie to people. If a couple says, hey, would you marry us in April? I can't just say no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's hard. I love Lincoln Berean. I've loved being a pastor here.
Yeah.
I think the people have loved me, and it's hard for everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about what's ahead for the church and what's ahead for Patty and I. So,
last spring I was in your kind of preaching workshop that you put on a lot, and you kind of detailed your process of how you prep a sermon. It's very fine tuned. You've been doing it for a while. As you were preparing this sermon and including, again, you've only done a message like this once. Was there, what were the feelings that came up? Was it harder to prepare something like this where you're ending it with saying, hey, I'm retiring soon? Did that change anything?
It helped a lot. Ryan's the one that suggested this would be a good text for this. And it actually was, because you have that passing of the baton on to Timothy and on. So it's really helpful then to just unfold the story. I think the challenge is go back and review what details are necessary and not get lost in too many details.
Right.
Get to the point. You can see it in people's faces, like they know something's coming.
Yeah.
So get to the point.
Yeah.
So that some of that's not so different than normal sermon prep. And I think having the youth on stage, that wasn't initially why it was done.
Right.
But all that just added to this is a theme, and it's who we've been as a church.
Did it feel different after the sermon was over on Saturdays and then twice on Sunday? Did you did something feel different of okay, now it's public, but you're also not leaving till January? Was there the feelings in that?
Oh, it is different.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through some of this in Broken Bow, even though the circumstances are different, because people have different emotional reactions.
Yeah.
Some people really didn't want to look at me and just walk out.
Mm.
Some people started crying. Some people are happy for you. Mm-hmm. And everybody's going to have to work through their own emotions.
Right.
And for me, even to keep it together.
Yeah. Was it emotional for you?
It is emotional. It's, I mentioned you've known for a few years here. So it's not new, but it just becomes more and more real.
Yeah.
Right.
So coming up will be my last Easter.
Right.
Mm.
And just a lot of these markers. And it's like, this is starting to set in.
Yeah.
And so it'll be a big change. I've loved what I've done. I still love what I do.
Yeah.
Right.
I've told you, I want to be done while I still love doing it.
Yeah.
And while the people still want me to stay.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can still be effective. But there is wisdom in trying to figure out when is it time.
Yeah.
And I feel really good about the timing of it all.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? So with that, you mentioned you've been here for 30 years.
Yeah, 32.
32.
I came in 93.
Okay. Culture is very different. Things have changed. There seems to be a pattern kind of in ministry, but just life too. It's like, I don't know if we have more job opportunities now where people just kind of bounce from job to job. You've been here for, 30 plus years. How have you stayed? Why have you stayed? What's been like, what's kept you around? You mentioned calling in the past. What's made you feel like when there could have been other opportunities come your way to leave, to go do something else, to retire earlier? What's kept you here at Berean?
Yeah, it's so calling is a big part of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had an overwhelming sense of call when I was in Broken Bow. Strangely enough, I was already there as an associate. And after about a year, the church split 3 ways.
That's right.
And I ended up pastoring the remnant of people that stayed. I kind of backed into this thing.
Yeah.
And they literally said to me, hey, we're wondering if you'd stay and preach until we can find a real pastor. And my degree was in education. I wasn't really thinking about being a pastor. I just wanted some experience in a local church.
Right.
So I just started preaching every week. And I remember thinking, I can't make this any worse. I mean, it was such a mess.
Wow.
And so I'm preaching every week. And probably about 6 months into it, I had an overwhelming sense this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And about that same time, the elders said, hey, we're wondering if you just stay and be our pastor. And I can honestly say from that moment till today, I've never doubted that.
Yeah.
So I was actually very content in Broken Bow. I wasn't looking to leave. I think I could have stayed there my whole ministry.
Yeah.
But when the elders came knocking, I prayed about it and really felt like this is a change God wanted me to make. So for this being my home church and a stewardship of stewarding the church I grew up in and just wanting to devote myself to this, I actually never considered another job. So since I've been here, it's like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
The people have been awesome to me. So think about it. 2 senior pastors in 60 years.
It's unbelievable.
What kind of a congregation do you have to have that makes that possible? So what an amazing place to be.
Right.
And so really quite a privilege. And my mom was living here. There's a chance to be back and live closer to her. So there's a lot of dynamics, but one of the benefits of staying so long is every weekend in the hall, I see the faces of people whose lives have been dramatically changed by the gospel. I knew them when they were a mess. People see them in the hall today and they're leading all these different areas and they're like, they have no idea what the story is.
Yeah.
So to me, there's tremendous encouragement and affirmation. It's like, I got to be part of something really special. And then I end up marrying their kids. I've married kids of couples I've married.
Yeah.
So even today, when I walk through the halls, it's like, man, this is the fruit of a lifetime labor.
Yeah.
And that's really meaningful.
I was talking to a couple this weekend, and you're going to do their wedding, and you also officiated their parents' wedding, and it's just what a what an incredible privilege that is.
On one hand, it makes me feel kind of old.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, even like this weekend when consecrated was singing, it's like looking at the kids, it's like I married their parents, their parents, their parents.
Yeah.
I do baptisms.
Yeah.
I do baby dedications.
Have you ever had any other church come knocking, make a play for you?
I have.
You? Yeah.
Who?
But it's just not.
Just kidding.
Yeah. But I've really never, I've prayed about it, but I've never had even the slightest
nothing seriously considered.
thought that I need to move on.
How do you, this isn't what we intended to talk about, but I am curious now, you just look the scene over and you see pastor after pastor after pastor step into situations, and eventually you learn something and they've had a moral failure or something. If you could give a word of advice, or if you could just even identify what has it been that's allowed you to walk with such character over the course of these years?
I think part of it we talked about this weekend, and that is paying attention to yourself. I don't ever want to get where the truth of the scripture is just academic.
Yeah.
But I'm always running it through my own grid and my own life. I think a really important issue has been not allowing my identity to be wrapped up in my role.
Yeah.
It's like I've tried really hard just to be me.
I think pastors really struggle with that.
They do.
Yeah.
You're on the stage, you get the spotlight, people want to put you on a pedestal. There's a part of our flesh that's like, hey, that's pretty good.
So how do you maintain that not to be your identity, like for 30 years?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is I'm really aware and have worked really hard to make sure that doesn't happen to me. So just being aware of it, like I can't affect whether or not somebody puts me on a pedestal or how people respond to me. I can control how I respond to them.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't change me as a person. Trying to be true to the theology you teach, that there's nobody more than, nobody less than. We're all in this together. This is just my role. I've had some people say to me, when this is over, you're going to really miss people fussing over you and making a big deal over you. And it's like, I really don't think so.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm ready to slip into the shadows and to be more anonymous and celebrate whatever's next. I don't think that's been my identity. I think the other thing is I'm a big hobby person, and I think that's kept me really grounded. Theodore Roosevelt once said, fishing is the great equalizer because before fish, all men are created equal. And there's truth to that.
Yeah.
I have a couple horses. I love to train and ride the horses. The horses don't know that I'm a senior pastor. They don't. None of that matters.
Yeah.
And so all that goes away. And most of my hobbies have that flavor to them. Is you're just you, and nobody's making a fuss.
Yeah.
And it also gets me involved with people that don't know me in a Lincoln Berean context. I'm just me.
Yeah.
And I think that's also helpful. I think it keeps me grounded. And I'm married to a woman who keeps me grounded.
I was going to say, Patty doesn't strike me as someone who just worships the ground you walk on, right?
She loves me.
Yeah,
she loves
absolutely.
me with all of her heart, but she's not impressed by
Right, yeah.
Never has
Which is really
been.
healthy. That's really healthy.
I've sometimes told the story that I used to play a lot of softball, and the church had a softball team that played in church league. We also played in the city league and a lot of tournaments and stuff. And the Thursday before the Saturday that we were to get married, we had a game, and I was obviously pretty wound up. And I think I got up 4 times, and 3 of the balls went over the fence, 3 home runs. So it's like, after the game, I'm just waiting for her to be so pressed that she gets to marry someone like me. Not a word.
All-star
not a
softball
word,
player. Yeah.
Not a word. And finally, late into the evening, hey, did you happen to watch the game? She's like, no. She was talking to so-and-so. Missed the whole thing.
Yeah.
And at first I was kind of offended by that because I think a lot of my identity had to do with sports.
Yeah.
But then I realized, she just loves me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't have anything to do with it. And that's held true now for almost 44 years.
Yeah.
It's like, she loves me, but she's not impressed by me.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think it also helps keep me grounded.
I'm sure it does.
I don't want to be a big deal.
Yeah.
That's never been my heart, but I do think you have to work at it.
That is one thing. I think I can say this about you. I don't think you'd say it about yourself, but you're very, you don't desire the spotlight. And I think that's been a great asset as you've been in a church that's been quite large. It's allowed you to walk through it really humbly, which I think has been a marquee element of your leadership is the consistency that's come with just a humble approach to leading this church and preaching God's word. What would you say? You mentioned it earlier about preaching the text, getting in the text every week. We've had some questions from people that have come in about, what do you do if your reading of God's word starts to feel stagnant or something like that? So in your own study, I mean, you preached books over and over again, a few of them, what's helped keep it fresh when you walk in and you're like, well, I know what Paul says here. How have you done that? How have you cultivated a fresh approach every time you dig in?
Yeah. So you think about preaching for 40 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend that was a physical therapist in Broken Bow, and he was working on my shoulder once, and he said, how do you come up with new ideas every week?
Yeah.
And it's like, if I was trying to do this topically,
Right.
that just seems so exhausting.
Yeah.
But it's like working your way through the text, and there's so many layers to the Word of God that you just keep going to a deeper layer. And I think every time I go through a book for a second or a third time, I'm better able to put pieces together. I see how it connects with other scriptures. It's going deeper. And then there's always this discussion among preachers whether or not your prep time is also your quiet time,
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
devotional time. For me, it has been.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense that this is just something else.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it's worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always trying to figure out, how does this apply to me? And as I grow and change in different seasons of life, how that truth comes across to me continues to change and be different and fresh.
Yeah.
So I think it's true of me personally, which then I think flows over to the preaching of it.
Yeah. That's good.
I don't think I've ever gone back through a book where I didn't correct myself at some place. It's like,
That's
I
interesting.
didn't have that right.
Yeah.
I didn't have this right.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be okay with that.
Right.
The thought that at age 25, you get it all right
Yeah.
is like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been a lifelong journey of continuing to grow and better understand. And I'm a learner by nature.
Yeah. Right.
That's who I am.
Yeah.
We used to go through this even in seminary where you start to feel like, hey, I have to read the entire book of John for a class. Is it okay to count that for quiet time? But even going back to what you said at the beginning, how do you keep it from becoming merely an academic pursuit? And it seems to marry those things together and say, I'm going to study it, but I'm going to study it not just with my head, but with my heart as well.
Yeah.
And let God speak to me through it.
Run it through the grid of my own life.
Yeah.
And part of what's required for that is a necessary amount of time
Yeah.
and some sort of a systematic schedule where I'm not cramming because the weekend's coming. I have
Right.
time to pull back, to think,
Yeah.
to meditate, to process.
Yeah.
And I think that's also created a healthy rhythm
Yeah.
where I know every week I have this time set aside. It's me and Jesus and the Word. And I think that that's created a really healthy rhythm. So one of the things I've had to think about is when that's not necessary anymore,
Right.
then what will that look like?
Right.
Yeah.
And the answer is, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to figure something out that I haven't had to figure out for
Yeah.
40 years.
And preach to the horses.
Yeah, maybe
And
so.
the fish.
They don't listen very well.
Yeah. Is that scary at all? Like, I was talking to Trevor Schmalley, who's on staff, and we were talking about if you have the same rhythms for 30 years straight, roughly, and you all of a sudden change because your life changes, like, that's a big deal. Like, is that scary, or is it more like exciting, or how do you feel about?
It's not scary. There's an excitement to it because it's the next season. Just the way I'm wired up, it's like I would never be someone who retires and then I'm going to watch TV all day or do nothing. It's like trying to figure out, I'll live purposely till the day I die.
Right.
It's just trying to figure out, what does that look like in the next season?
Yeah.
And to me, there's an excitement to that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure. I've never done it before.
Yeah.
But I'm not concerned about it. I'm confident I'll sort my way through it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we should get to the
topic.
we don't want to just sit here. That's the title of the pod.
Yeah.
So we should go into some of that content.
Yes.
So we've been talking about growing in our faith and an active pursuit. But what would you say to somebody when you are talking about growing in godliness? That was the message this past weekend. How would you advise someone to not slip into an attitude of legalism as they seek to grow?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think there's often a lot of confusion around that topic. So, for example, usually it's a younger generation, and they tend to anything they don't like. Oh, well, that's legalism. Well, that's legalism. That's just a way to be dismissive. And it's like, well, that's not legalism. So you said several weeks ago, legalism is a belief. And that's exactly the way I would define it. We tend to think if there's rules, if there's disciplines, if there's, oh, that's legalism. It's like, no, it's a belief. It's what I believe about those rules or disciplines or practices.
Yeah.
So what I would say is genuinely my heart is to walk uprightly and to walk in righteousness before God, because I believe that's where life is found. That's where I'm going to find the pleasure of God. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. But to do that, you have to think through, how am I going to live? What are my priorities going to be? What's the best way to experience that? So I have certain disciplines. I have certain practices. I have certain things I do and don't do, not because I think they make me more before God,
Right.
any more than think about like when Patty and I got married. Oh, no, here's the rules. You can't have an affair. You can't.
Yeah.
And it's like, my heart is to love her and for us to flourish together. And that motivates then my behaviors. So it's the same thing with God. It's like, this isn't to earn God's favor or righteousness or have him love me more. It's in order to create a pathway where I'm most likely to experience the life and the pleasure my soul's longing for. So remembering legalism is a belief about what I do.
Yeah.
And it's
a belief that what?
It's a belief that I can make myself more before God. If I'm going to keep it really simple.
Yeah.
And I can't. It's all on the basis of his grace.
Yeah.
So by doing and not doing things, I'm not gaining his love or his favor. I'm not becoming more righteous or more justified. I'm choosing to walk in a path that I think leads to the life I want to live. So this summer, Patty and I have been married for 44 years, and it's not unusual. Somebody will say, yeah, well, you're lucky. And I used to just kind of let that go, but I don't let it go anymore. I said, it's not lucky. It's like, these are choices I made when I was 16, when I was 25, when I was 30, when I'm 50, the decisions I made yesterday. It's like, it's choices to experience the love and the depth and the flourishing that you want.
Yeah.
And I find trying to think it through, a correlation like in my marriage helps me think it through in my relationship with God. One's a picture of the other, and it helps maybe make sense in a little bit more concrete way.
Yeah.
So how, in our life group, we had a discussion this last week about certain disciplines of what to do, what not to do. So for those who are listening, it's like, okay, I agree. I don't want to do things with the belief that it can make me more in front of God. Like, what disciplines do you encourage? Is it all about, hey, how is your heart? What's your belief behind the discipline? Like, how do you practically engage in certain disciplines now to not just sit there?
Okay. So just going back to what I just talked about, the correlation with a marriage.
Yeah.
I'm very mindful, being very intentional to continue to cultivate a depth of relationship with Patty. So way back when I was in my 20s, it became obvious to me that the culture's on a mission to get me disappointed with the woman I'm married to. All these ridiculous comparisons and compete and, well, what about that girl? What about that girl? And to me, that's like a competition. I'm pretty competitive. It's like game on. I have devoted myself for 40 years to believing with all my heart that she's the most wonderful, amazing person that I could possibly have. And I tell her all the time, I say, honey, probably the best decision I've ever made in my life, other than my relationship with Jesus, is to marry you. And it's like, I do believe that. I believe it with all my heart. But I've cultivated that. I've worked at it. I've focused on it. I'm very aware of how I interact with other women in the congregation and on staff. I don't think anybody would say I've ever been flirtatious. And it's like, I'm really aware of all that. In my most personal, private moments, there's no secrets. I don't have anything on my phone or my computer. But I've been disciplined to that. That matters to me.
Right.
So it's very similar in my relationship with God in thinking through, Proverbs talks about guard your heart. So like, what does that mean? So I think a lot about intake. What am I putting into my head?
Yeah. What
am I doing with that? A practical example of that is I made the decision. I'm not saying anybody else has to make this decision. I made the decision clear back when President Obama was president that I'm done with television news. I don't like how it makes me feel. I don't like the emotions it stirs in me. I don't like the frustration. I think their purpose is to divide. That's how they get ratings. They create a lot of emotions in people. The 24-hour news cycle demands they have some way to keep people tuned in.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it dawned on me, hey, I have a choice in this matter. And in this day and age, there's lots of ways to get information or to get news. I've had people say, well, how do you get your news? And it's like, well, first of all, I'm not sure that's news. Every network, whatever it is, has an agenda. They have a purpose. I'm getting part of the news. I'm getting their slant on it. But there's other ways to get information that doesn't have as much emotion and drama. But I've also said, if at the end of my life, I wasn't as informed as I could have been, but I've loved Jesus and others deeply, that's a trade-off I'm willing to take.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, I'm disliking people I've never met. And I'm frustrated with people I've never met. People were supposed to be loving and reaching, and I don't want to preach mad. It's like, that's not a good posture for a preacher.
Yeah.
I want to preach with passion. I love these people, and I want to passionately try and motivate them to walk down a path that's going to deliver life in their relationship with God. But that's different than being mad and preaching mad. So that was just a decision I made. I felt like that's a path I want to choose. I'm not on social media. It's my choice. I feel like that's healthy for me. There's a lot, and Ryan's learned this. When you're preaching, you're talking about a lot of personal things with people, and people have ways of reacting that, and they have things they want to say. It's like, I don't want 10 different ways for people to criticize me and attack me. It's like, maybe I'll limit it to one or two. And at this season of my life, if somebody sends in an angry email, about all they get back from me is, hey, why don't you come in? It's like, I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm not going to do it through email. So some of that's just trying to figure out, I have a built-in discipline of quiet and solitude that's necessary to prepare every week. So that's automatically built into my schedule, and I've been really protective of that. Like I said, when I'm done here, I'm going to have to figure out now what does that look like, and create some different disciplines.
I think it's interesting. You and I have talked about this. I get concerned sometimes about conversation around disciplines, not because they're not helpful. They're very helpful, but it seems like sometimes they can become, it's a little bit like a funhouse mirror. They get distorted. They become too important. It'd be like saying, how do you have a good marriage? And you say, well, you have a date night every Friday night. Yeah, having a date night every Friday night can be a really good thing, but having a date night every Friday night doesn't make a good marriage.
No.
There's something that has to happen that's deeper. And what you were talking about is there was something that compelled you. There's a vision of what marriage was supposed to be that was compelling to you, that then led you to say, okay, now I'm going to cultivate this because I long for this thing that God has set in front of me. Because I long for a certain type of marriage, there are going to be some things I do, but the things aren't the point. The vision that God gave you is the point. The vision of marriage, the vision of the goodness of it, the vision of what He gifted you and giving you the wife He gave you. It seems like sometimes we get overly focused on the tactics and we lose sight of what
the why or
the why. And that I was thinking about that this weekend when you talked about godliness, because Paul says godliness is of great value, right? Not only in this life, but in the life to come. And one of the questions I had is, how do we help people become compelled by a life of godliness? How do you stir that up to where people are saying, man, I long for that? I don't know. That's a pretty big question. That's a big question.
It's very challenging. Because you're competing with all the voices in the culture, and so much of that is immediate. And it makes sense to people because it's right there.
Right.
And we're talking more in abstracts. And it's a little bit more difficult to comprehend. How do you really have a love relationship with a God who is a spirit?
Right.
So it is a challenge. I think, just like in the text, Paul tells Timothy, show yourself to be an example. It's like, I do want to present an authentic example of somebody who's passionately in love with Jesus. I determined a long time ago, my life mission is to help people become so excited about God, they become contagious. So it's like, I think when it is there, it is contagious. So as a church body has that sense about them. Like over the years, I've heard so many people say, we walked into Lincoln Berean, there's something different here. And that caused them to come back. So you have to see it and feel it, even if you can't necessarily identify it. So I think that's part of it. I've always had as a preaching goal that I'd love that one of the things that happens when I preach is people get so excited about the book, they want to read it at home. So I'm not wanting to communicate, this book is so complicated. Without me, you could never understand it. Right. It's like, this is such a great book. Like maybe open it up at home and read it. So I think that's part of it. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the whole idea of the we're created for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of people like I'm blown away by that.
Yeah.
I had a couple people tell me, when you said that right at the beginning of your sermon, it's like, got so quiet in the room.
Yeah.
We just don't think of God that. We don't think of the fact he's the author of pleasure. It was his idea. That's everything the garden was about. And that's where we're headed.
Mm-hmm.
We don't tend to think of God in those terms, but it's like, what else does the world offer that lasts compared to what, in your presence are pleasures forevermore?
Yeah.
About a month ago, Patty and I went to Hawaii to visit one of our daughters. And the thing that I think was so striking to me is Hawaii is beautiful. And you have the ocean and the beaches and all this stuff. But there's people there with ridiculous amounts of money in this island paradise, and they seem so miserable. They're yelling at each other. They're yelling at their kids. I told Patty, I haven't seen that many people yell at each other in Lincoln in 5 years. We were only there a week. But it kind of has that feel of we made it all the way to the top of the ladder, and it's as empty as the bottom was.
Yeah.
And I wish people could really think through, when you get to the end of your story, what do you think's going to matter?
Yeah.
I call it the funeral perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I've done a lot of funerals, and I always sit down with the family and I say, hey, what is it you want to remember about your loved one that's passed? I've never had a family say, make sure you mention he had a lot of money, had this title, very successful, had 3 cars. I've never had that, even though quite a few of the people actually live that way.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden in that moment, it's like, that doesn't really matter, does it? And there's much more of a sense of what does matter.
Yeah.
And maybe because I do funerals a lot, I'm with really hurting, suffering people a lot. It does create a perspective of what matters and what doesn't matter. I had my first heart surgery at age 39. I think that affected my perspective a lot
Yeah.
in terms of life's a gift. It's pretty fragile.
Yeah.
If I die tomorrow, I want to be clear on what matters and what doesn't. So to me, all of that goes into it, and trying to help people think that way. Right. We've talked a lot about, I don't want anybody to get to the finish line and then realize I totally missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of my job as their pastor, as someone who genuinely loves them, it's like, I'm going to do everything in my power to try and avoid that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned how getting people excited about God, and how you, a couple of weeks ago, talked about how God is a God of pleasure and created pleasure. And a couple of weeks ago, you wouldn't know because you don't listen to our podcast, but we talked about fixing our view of God. It's like, as we want to become people who are walking with Jesus, it seems to start with, how do we think about God? You've written a book on it. You've talked about it from stage for years. I think we all agree that's important, but in your words, like one sentence, why is it important to have an accurate, we'll get into like what that looks like practically, but why is it important to have an accurate view of God?
I think because it creates the lens through which we read the word and understand it. And it also becomes the lens through which we interpret the events of life. I mean, we all understand life's hard and it can be really confusing. I think when you're younger, sometimes those words don't make a lot of sense, but eventually you're going to hit something that's going to cause you to wonder, where's God and why did this have to happen?
Yeah.
And where do we go from here? I've preached quite a bit about my dad's illness and wrestling with those questions myself. But when Bobby, my middle daughter, when her baby died, I remember we were on the deck, and this was just a couple weeks later, talking about some of these things. And she said, Dad, I've always heard you talk about that, but it never made sense to me until now. Like these deep feelings of, where's God and why does it have to be this way? And if God is so loving, and it's like, but But all those things come through a lens. If you already have a messed up view of God, then how you interpret all that stuff. And what I've seen over the years, it just drives people deeper into despair, deeper into the pit, because it just confirms an already messed up view of God. God isn't so, it's Genesis 3. It's God isn't so loving. He isn't kind. He isn't generous. As a matter of fact, I think he's kind of mean and he's distant and he doesn't care and he doesn't love me. And so everything in our Christian life ultimately filters through what is my view of God.
Do you have,
Yeah.
do you have like, and you mentioned your dad's illness and other things with your family. As you look back at your life, what have been some of the most formative moments when your view of God was kind of pressed and you had to rethink, okay, how do I actually think of God? Like there are moments in your life that you had to rethink stuff like that?
So the biggest one would have been my dad's illness and story. And it's hard for people to appreciate that if they haven't lived in that for an extended period of time. You're talking about 22 years of pain and suffering and all that affected with both my mom and dad. But that was normal. That's all I ever knew. I don't ever remember my dad out of bed. I don't ever remember my dad and having one single pain-free day. So strangely enough, that was normal. But then when Patty and I got married and we started having kids, for whatever reason, it sunk in. This is normal. You know, I'm holding my kids, I'm walking, I'm throwing a ball to my kids. And it's like, wow, what I grew up with wasn't normal. And so that started this journey of how do I make sense of that? So I'm in this weird place where on Sundays, I'm preaching about the love and kindness and compassion of God. And I'm literally coming home thinking, I don't know that I believe that because I can't make sense of this. At that point, most of my life with what I'm saying is true of God.
Yeah.
So that became a real wrestling. And ultimately, I settled it not because I got answers on any of that. But certainly the biggest step of faith of my life was to choose to believe God tells the truth about who he is, even though I can't reconcile that with what I experienced. And I would say that I really did settle it there. So, you know, life can get confusing. So going through just stuff we've gone through with the death of Bobby's baby, with the death of Travis, our son-in-law, 2 heart surgeries. My mom went through 3 bouts of cancer. She died in our home. And that one was really hard because if I could make a case for one person that at some point should have easy going to the finish line, it would be my mom. And it's like, it's really confusing. Like, God, why wouldn't you just give her that? I mean, she was amazing. But it's cancer, and then it's cancer, and then she died of the cancer. And it wasn't a very pretty death. I went 72 hours without sleep because I knew it was so important that I would be there when she died. And I couldn't risk being asleep when it happened. So it was a thing. But what I continued to tell Patty through all those things was I settled this once and I'm not going back. It's like I'm not digging it all up. I'm not re-wrestling with all the questions. When James in James chapter 1 says, consider it all joy. That word consider is a aorist tense verb, which means it's a past tense verb at a point in time. So he's not saying every time something hard comes up, go back through and consider it again. It's like settle it. And I feel like that's indicative of my own story. Like I settled it, and that's where I'm at. And that's then become, to your question, that's become the filter through which all the rest of these things have come. And I think that's been helpful for Patty and for my kids because I'm not unstable in those. And I think that helps them process it through their own stuff. You know, it's nobody's fault that they haven't gone through stuff.
Right.
So it's good for you.
Yeah.
But it will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then everybody has to learn those lessons themselves.
Yeah.
But it does help to have, I think part of what I've brought to the congregation is there's a sense of stability.
Mm-hmm.
That's just part of my own story. And it's like, if the world is falling apart, it's like, it's going to be okay.
Mm.
You know, and I think in an age where everything is so dramatic and everything's so emotional, whether you're talking about your family or the youth ministry or the larger church, it's like somebody needs to be there that says, hey, God's got this.
Yeah.
It is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna do a little like a pod here. We're talking with accomplished author
Oh boy.
and senior
New York
pastor
bestselling. Yeah.
emeritus Bryan Clark.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
So for people who haven't read the book, would recommend the book, but
I have read the book, honestly.
well, he hasn't listened to the pod, so
Right. Fair.
you don't need to feel
You
bad.
listen up, so I'll read the
You
book.
read, I'll listen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this gets into our view of God.
Yes.
So, can you summarize a little bit what you explored in this book?
So for years as a pastor, I have these conversations with people. And it's a little bit probably like going to the doctor. You come in with some issue you're presenting, but it turns out that's not really the issue. There's something way more going on, way deeper. So you talk enough and it's like you have a really messed up view of God, and that's at the core of this. And until that gets sorted out, I think you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
I would say there's lots of very sincere Christ followers, but they can't seem to figure out how to experience this relationship with God their souls long for, and they don't know why. They really are trying hard. They're not pretending, but it's like, why doesn't this work for me? And at the core is a view of God that's all messed up. The frustration for me as a pastor is just telling you that doesn't fix it. And there's no simple 1, 2, 3, here's how to fix that. Because you can even say you need to read your Bible more, but you're still reading it and interpreting it through this lens.
Yeah.
So it's not really helping. So for years, that was my frustration. So I wrote the book as my attempt to put something in the hands of people that helps them walk through their own story with their family of origin and begin to sort out where might my view of God be messed up. Because most of these confusions around who God is roots back to things I experienced or learned in my family of origin.
Yeah.
And the case I make is because God made the family to work that way. That's where your view of God is supposed to be shaped. But that's a bit of a two-edged sword that can be really, really good, or that can be really, really bad. But sometimes I had wonderful parents. It was nobody's fault that my dad had this illness, but it certainly shaped my view of God. So it doesn't mean they had to be bad or abusive, or there's just things that happen. And that shapes your view of God. And it's like, how do you work your way through your own story? So everybody has a story, and the book is written in such a way that you can walk through your own story. And I think it can help you identify areas where your view of God is probably off.
Well, everyone comes in, no one comes in with a neutral view of God.
No.
Right? I mean, we come to faith,
No.
or even in our faith, we've been shaped. We come with a view. We already have one.
Including all non-Christians.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, they all have a view of God. Even an atheist has a view of God.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody if they have this moment, which is a fantastic moment, where God reveals to them, hey, your view of me is off? Where would you recommend one start? Obviously, we'd say, we can say it, you wouldn't say it. We'd say that's what the book's intended to help you do.
Yeah.
But what would you say to somebody?
Yeah, I would probably recommend the book
Yeah.
and talk to them about the importance of family of origin and working their way through that. The other part of the discussion that's been helpful is, so let's imagine you have a father wound. And so then that gets projected onto God, and you have all kinds of strange ideas about God. Like you have to perform, you have to measure up, you're trying to be accepted, all this stuff that goes on. So you can sort out your view of God by thinking through your own story. But as a father who has children, you can also turn it around and say, think about your own experience as a father and how you love your children and how you celebrate your children. That's a pretty good picture of who God is and what God wants for you. So like your kids mess up, your heart is not to just whack them because you're mad. You're trying to help. So some people have found a lot of help in just thinking it through the grid of, well, I'm a father, I'm a mother. This is how I feel about my kids. So that caused me to rethink how God must feel about me. So that's another way that people have found helpful to sort it through.
It's a daunting thing as a parent.
It is.
It's terrifying.
It is. Yeah, it is.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah. Again, kind of goes back to then thinking through disciplines and all this stuff is like the stakes are really high with this. So my girls are watching how much Patty and I love each other in formulating their view of God and Christ in the church. And it's like that needs to matter. I need to be aware of that.
You might have already kind of hit on this, but like some people might say, I think I view God pretty accurately. I know we talked about if you give us a test to fill out, is God kind? We would say, oh yeah, we fill all the right answers, but it comes to us actually living it out. So maybe I already answered the question, but what's a good, like, what's the word? Limbic? No.
Limbic.
What's that?
The limbic system?
Like when you
Some
test
system in
something,
your body.
test.
Litmus?
Yeah, what is it?
Litmus?
A litmus test?
What does that mean?
Litmus.
What is that?
A litmus test is like it would identify whether this is accurate or not. It would be.
So that applies. I've always heard that saying or that word, never knew what it meant.
So you should keep saying limbic test though.
It's a very educational podcast.
Litmus.
Yeah.
Litmus.
Litmus.
Yeah, got it.
What would be a good litmus test for someone's view of God? Of like, if they were to say, I think I view God pretty accurately, what should they do to be like, let's put that to the test a little bit and see, is that shown in my actions? Is that actually accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually.
Good job.
Litmus test.
Yeah.
I think it comes out in the fruit of your behavior, your character, how you respond to difficult things, trying to identify if you're motivated by the need for significance and value, how you view stuff and money. All those things are indications of what your value system is, which flow out of your view of God. One of the things I've found since God's Not Like That has been out is there are people that are quickly dismissive
Like they think
of the concept. And
in what way?
Like they got that covered.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I don't.
I'm good.
That's not me. I sorted that out. I figured it out. Almost everybody I know that has responded that way is because they have deep issues they've never resolved, and they're like, I am not going there
Not
no
digging that
matter
up.
what.
Yeah.
It's almost like
Let's keep that dark
keep the
room
book
dark.
to yourself,
Yeah.
preacher. I'm not going.
Yeah.
And that's indicative of the fact that there's a mess that they've never dealt with. I tend to think of it, whether it's repressed memories or whatever, all this psychological stuff. I think of it as like getting stuffed in a closet because people don't want to deal with it. And there's a reality that when you're young, you probably need to do that until you're emotionally strong enough to pull it back out and deal with it. I think that's part of how God's made our brains. But eventually, no matter what you do, it starts seeping under the door and starts to affect life in ways that aren't pleasant. And oftentimes when people come to see me, it's like it's seeping under the door, and it's time to start opening the door and dealing with it.
It's going to come out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to come out somehow. Seems like that's why Paul, you already talked about James, but I think about Paul saying light momentary affliction is producing in us an eternal way to glory. God uses that. It's like when we experience, when things don't go our way, sometimes my view of God might become very clear in that moment.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is sometimes other people can help you with that. Like you think you're fine, but you might have other people that really know you be like, I don't know that you are fine.
Yeah.
How you react to this or this or this seems really odd.
Yeah.
Or confusing, or even how you react to scripture. I tell people, notice what things in scripture kind of set you off. Like you have an emotional reaction to it. There must be some reason. And it usually roots back to something about God is confused. So think about reading through the Gospels. There's certain things that happen there, and there's a reaction like, I don't know about that. It's like, oh, where's that coming from? So I have a buddy that really interesting relationship with both his parents, but a relationship with his mom, who was never really a mom, even into his adult life. It was the oddest relationship. And so he struggles with this idea of God as a place of refuge. And so he tends to respond to difficult things in life in ways that aren't very healthy. And it's trying to help him understand. I think he is getting it. You never had that. So you learn to cope in other ways. And you need to kind of process your way through that in order to experience God as your place of refuge. Because the bottom is going to drop out.
Yeah.
Then where do you go?
Yeah.
Going back to your view of God, when you talked about James, consider it all joy. What was it about God that in that moment you struggled to believe that in that moment you had to kind of almost draw a line in the sand and say, I'm going to choose to believe this about him?
Back in my 20s?
Yeah.
Is that
Wrestling with your dad's suffering.
Well, thinking about what I witnessed, and then the description of God is kind. I didn't see that. Compassionate. I didn't see that. Loving. Didn't see that. I mean, what sense does it make? This is someone who loves Jesus with all his heart, had dedicated his life to serving him, had amazing musical talent. So his gift was playing the organ, playing the piano as a composer. That composer, that was actually his job. You know, my dad wrote the theme song for the Billy Graham Crusades in the 70s.
Whoa.
So you're talking about pretty high level.
I know.
And you take it all away. It's like you gnarl up his fingers so he can't even push a key. Confine him to a bed. It's like, how do you explain that?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So almost every description of God that we would look at and say, that's comforting, wasn't comforting to me. So that's where I was really stuck. It's like, I don't know how to make sense of this. And people they mean well, but there's a lot of cliches in the Christian culture that aren't really helpful.
Yep.
Even today, people say, well, look what God did in you through that. And it's like, that. I appreciate that, but it doesn't explain the level of pain and suffering. And even there was a biography written on my dad's life. It's called Nothing is Impossible. And it's helped a lot of people. I still give it out today. But it ended before my dad's death. And what's always striking to me is the last chapter was by far the most difficult chapter. So it's like, that's after the book.
Yeah.
So it twisted and gnarled, like his fingers were broken back on themselves. His wrist was broken back on itself. I mean, it's an ugly disease. His kneecaps were as big as a melon, but his thighs were, it's just a bone. his toes. I mean, it's on and on. You get the idea. And he was totally blind. So he couldn't roll over by himself. He couldn't sit up by himself. He couldn't feed himself. My mom did all that. And if anybody did something wrong, he literally would break. So the level of care, you couldn't just ask somebody to come over and watch him for a while, kind of a thing. But the last thing it twisted was his head, until it twisted it so far around it killed him. And it's like, just try to imagine watching that month after month after month until the end comes. So these are all the things that are like, I don't get that. And to this day, I don't. It's like, I don't have the answers. I can't make sense of that. But I do choose to believe, and God met me there. And I would say without hesitation today, I do believe he is kind, and he's gentle, and he's loving, and he's compassionate. I do believe that. I just can't reconcile that with my dad's story, and I leave it that way. It's like, I don't know.
Like kind of sitting that tension of God is this, and yet this happened. How long did it take you to be okay? I mean, you kind of already answered that. Like, I mean, some people struggle, especially in our world now. We want to know the answer. Things are black and white.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get to that tension of, like you just said, God's good and kind, and I still don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it was in my late 20s. I mean, I wrestled a lot, but I didn't reach a point where I figured it out, where something made sense, where I could sort it out. I just reached the point. I'm a pretty practical person by nature. It's like I can go down this path and be angry and bitter the rest of my life, or I can go down this path and experience the life that God offers me. So there was like a fork in the road. But to choose to go down the right path is to accept I'm not going to get answers. And I have to be okay with that. And I think back now, like a huge factor in that was my parents' acceptance of it. If they'd have gone bitter, we'd have all gone bitter. Easy. So then I think about how much that decision for me has affected our marriage, affected how I represented God to my children. Like my kids could all be rebellious and often into all kinds of destructive things. If I would have made the decision to become angry and bitter, what effect that would have had on my marriage? I mean, I don't know. It's sobering to me now, like how big of a decision that was because of how many people it affected.
Yeah.
And I think it's been helpful for me as a pastor because I can identify with those really hard questions, and I'm not going to give them a bumper sticker slogan. I'm just going to try to help them work out in some ways through my own story.
Yeah.
And come to some level of acceptance. But there's lots of things in our theology that there's like, I don't get it. I don't get how prayer works. You know, how does prayer move the hand of a sovereign God?
Right.
And how does God choose and we believe? And so there's lots of things where it's like, I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Wow. Thanks for listening. Nope. thanks for listening, Bryan. No, thanks for listening. That's all we got. Thanks for being here, Bryan. That was powerful.
You're welcome.
That was good. I enjoyed that. I might go now read your book. Maybe.
I might listen to your podcast.
All right. Fair trade. Right. Check out our episode next week. We're doing a Q&A. Submit those questions. See you next week.
How do they submit questions?
Don't just sit there at lincolnbereanpod.org.
No, don't just sit there, pod at lincolnberean.org.
No one remembers that.
Or they can comment.
What if they just hand deliver them?
They could hand deliver them.
They could write us.
Telegraph, those kind of things.
Pigeon. Or comment on Spotify, comment on YouTube. You can go on Lincoln
Text Aiden. Give them your phone number.
402-641. It's good. See you next week.
Thank you.